I would have to say that the first book that I really identified with was Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. And of course, the character of that story and the part of the world that story was created was the part of the world that I grew up in. Um, I loved the idea of the struggle. And, my father was the one that turned me on to the book. Um, he was pretty hardcore on a lot of levels. And I think I was like 7 years old, and I asked him for an allowance because all the other kids were getting an allowance. And he looked at me and he said, "You're not getting free money from me." He would take care of things that I needed, like education and travel and, medical expenses and stuff like that. But the rest of it was up to me. And so I started delivering papers, and I have a friend who's doing that now, and he was like, "You were 7 years old when you were delivering papers." He's like, "That was a different world then." And it certainly was. And as I got bigger, I cut lawns. Because I was like a little monkey, I cleaned the nets of the fishermen. Got all the crap out of them when they came back in. And a lot of other work that I did on people's boats, polishing, and washing. And if they would come in after a long day of fishing and, the boat was blood-stained, I'd go and clean that up. Um, when I was 12 years old, my dad took a job at the port of Miami. And, the passenger ships would come in and they needed somebody working on the parking lots. And they just kind of overlooked the fact that they were violating the child labor laws. My dad was one of the executives for the seaport at that point. He had retired from the military. I worked in his lodge, bussing tables. I mean, I did everything that I could. And the last summer that he was alive, he thought I was blowing my money because I had a lot of, really cool stuff for a kid. But a lot of it was bartering. Sometimes people couldn't pay cash and, they trade me a knife or something. And I really liked knives when I was a kid. It was scary. Um, but he told me he would match $2 for every one that I had at the end of the summer. And my father never welched on a bet or a deal. And so I went, it was like the day before I had to fly back to boarding school. I went over to the corner of the carpet where I had just thrown all of my money, tips, lawns, everything. And I started counting it out, and my father started going pale when I got to $1,000. And I ended up counting out about $2,000. I mean, I worked really hard. And the thing is, in fairness, I did have some money that was left over. Um, I was pretty good at hooking people up with things that they wanted, with stuff people had that didn't want. And, I mean, my dad's denying me allowance actually created a good work ethic in me. I mean, there are people who've been in my life in the last 10 or 15 years that just don't get it. My health is messed up. And, I worked very hard up until my late 30s. I still work hard. It's just not work that the corporate structure likes too much because I'm on my own clock. But when my dad passed away at 14, I had a couple of bonds in his name, which was my name as well, like $3,000, and I cashed those in. And I had all the money that I had saved, from working. Um, and I put it together, and Nixon had made it legal for people to buy gold, and it was like $140 an ounce. And silver at that point was around $4 an ounce. And I had quite a bit of silver already in a safety deposit box that a relation I'd never met, he was a jeweler, and these are like little silver ingots. So I bought precious metals and I put them in the bank, in the safety deposit boxes. I had five of them. And I just left them there. And what happened is it was getting time for my 18th birthday. Some greedy prick in Texas wanted to corner the world's silver market. I think his name is Hunt. And so what happened was the price of silver shot up to almost $50 an ounce, and gold went up to $600 an ounce. I went in and I sold it all. My second father, Richard, had been out of work for a while, and at first he didn't want to take it, but I gave him some money. And I got my passport, and I got on. It was either Braniff or Freddie Laker SkyTrain, and I took off for England at 18 and crossed over into the continent and into North Africa. And I spent quite a bit of time in Europe, just traveling around by myself, going to visit my family in Sweden, visiting some of my relations in Scotland, also Swedes. um, but it was my money, and my father used to always say to me, "Spend your own goddamn money first," and that's exactly what I did, and it was a substantial sum. Um, it created a lot of opportunity for me, and there is no question about it. I do come from a prominent family. Um, Inventors and builders and some pretty extraordinary minds. Um, and that money actually lasted me for a while, and it was, when it was gone, that's when I finally dipped into what my father had left me. But I made it work pretty much for about 10 years. Um, and I've had other times in my life where I've made quite a bit of money. Um, but the focus isn't on the money. It's about self-reliance. It's about doing things in your life, in your world that you made possible. Um, and I look back on that, and people that have known me, all my life know that I've never quite gotten over, my best friend from childhood's death, my father. Um, and he was an extraordinary man. Um, and I was very lucky to have him. He was telling me the last year and a half that he was alive. All of these things that just, I would like look at him and I'm like, why the hell are you telling me this? And I didn't get it until later on that he was planting seeds because he knew he wasn't well. He knew he was going to go, sooner rather than later. His siblings had died in their 40s. His parents in their 40s as well. And, it is what is referred to as the Lundberg curse. Um, but, you know, drawing back on that and remembering that, and certainly my time in Europe and North Africa, I will get into at some other point. I look now at some 18-year-olds, and I'm like, wow, I really went at that age and did this. Um, I mean, growing up in Key West and boarding schools and the places that I was at in my childhood, I was always looking for a way out. And, come full circle in my life later on, I realized that everything that I went to 44 countries. Who does that? My dad had a thing when he would take me to a different country. I had to read three books, one on their history, one on their politics or their religion, and something about the origins of the natives that were there before. My dad had a very strong connection with that. He wanted me to understand that, much of what we claim as ours was actually taken from somebody else. He was very ethical in that way. I'll never forget when I was in school and my dad had gotten me the books on Columbus and I wrote and I don't remember exact wording, but I called him a genocidal maniac and I got suspended from school for it. And my dad looked at the note from the teacher and he looked at me and he said, "We're going into school tomorrow." And I said, "But I'm suspended." And he said, "Oh no, that's not going to happen." So, he walked in and my dad was a big dude. He just moved this teacher's stuff aside and he put the three books on the desk. And he said, "What is wrong with this paper?" And he said, "Your son is calling Columbus a murderer." And my father looked at him and he said, "That's what these fact check books say." He instilled in me a lot of things. And, as a kid and even into my 30s, I didn't appreciate fully the wisdom that he had bestowed upon me. And what I'm getting at is, as elders, whether parents or, somebody that's older, we have an obligation to pass down our knowledge and our wisdom, even at a time when people aren't necessarily going to get it. To die with wisdom is a very selfish thing. To share it is one of the greatest acts of generosity people can do for the upcoming generation. And so, with that, I, I'm just at this point about sharing a lot of ideas and things that I've been working with. And this is one of them. We've got to do better by the young. We truly do. Thank you for listening.